Professor Kham Khan Suan, Hausing, the head of the Political Science Department in the University of Hyderabad. Professor Suan completed his doctorate from the Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi, taught at Banaras Hindu University in Banaras, and just under a decade ago moved to Hyderabad. And today, of course, we're talking about the fast deteriorating situation in Manipur, where Dr. Suan comes from. He belongs to the Zomi tribe. And the situation in Manipur has become so bad that Home Minister Amit Shah, after a visit to Manipur a couple of weeks ago, has called for an all-party meeting on Saturday. But let me not get ahead of myself and let me welcome Professor Suan to ThePrint. Professor, welcome.
Thank you, Jyoti, for having me on board.
So, Professor, let me start by just painting a very brief picture of your state, Manipur. It's a terrible situation. Some people are even calling it a civil war, with more than 110 people who have been killed in these last 7 weeks since the 3rd of May, since the violence started, the ethnic conflict started between the predominantly Methi ethnic group who live in the plains and the Kuki-Zomi tribes who live in the hills. So just to say this again, more than 110 people have been killed, more than 400 have been wounded, and nearly 60,000 people have been displaced. They are in army camps, in shelter and relief camps. More than 279 churches have been burnt down, as well as 17 temples. So explain to us what is going on. Why is it that some people are calling this a civil war-like situation that's unfolding in Manipur?
Jyoti, I think one of the ways in which we can see this is how I see it. It's plain and clear, which is an institutionalized riot system. I have maintained since the outbreak of this violence that this is a very distinctive breakdown of law and order, which in effect is precipitated by the full complicity of the state, which in effect actively participate in laying the grounds for this violent conflict, and also in sustaining the structural violence which perpetuate this violence. So if you look at the statistics that you have before you, and the counter statistics that I have, at least from the hill areas, is in effect reinforcing to what I just have pointed out, which clearly indicates that over 120 people who have died, out of which 94 belong to the Kuki-Zomi. And 355 churches burned down already, and 200 villages, predominantly 160 Kuki-Zomi villages, burned down, and more than 50,000 internally displaced, including over 41 Kuki-Zomi internally displaced population, which suggests that the brunt of the violence is the targeted communities, that is the Kuki-Zomi communities. Mm-hmm. And seen in that sense, I think it is very disappointing to note that the structural violence continue to be perpetuated. They are relentlessly targeted as troublemakers, and as if the chief minister, until recently, continued to, target the communities as essentially at the back of this violence, which, however, seems to be changing, since 19th of this month, when the chief minister for the first time accept the participation of armed Meitei groups, who he in fact asked not to launch any further offensive against the Kuki-Zomi groups. Okay. So in that sense, I think there are certain patterns to this violence, which is distinctive for earlier conflicts, in the sense that the state is fully complicit. The state plays active as well as central role, both in perpetuating as well as sustaining this violence. So to that extent, I think the state is at the heart of this conflict. And I mean, so long as the state wants this to continue for short-term electoral gains, I think the violence is not likely to see any abate in the future.
Professor Suan, you're making a lot of statements. You're making accusations, in fact, against the Biren Singh government, which is BJP government in Manipur. And Amit Shah, the Home Minister of India, also a very senior BJP leader, visited Manipur on the 29th. And again, like I said earlier, he's called for an all-party meeting. So are you accusing the BJP of deliberately provoking and exacerbating the situation instead of tamping it down, for example, by imposing President's rule and Article 355?
Yeah, that's precisely the point. In fact, I'm not actually accusing it. By all accounts, if you were carefully to look at and weigh, the patterns that emerge over time, they are, in fact, cleansing evidence to suggest that, even Amit Shah's visit on 29th of May, where he gave 15 days of peace, which in effect fell on deaf ears, was seen largely as another, time given to this militant armed organization to do their bidding, in order to unleash offensive strikes against the Kukis of Mui. Remember
that's another accusation.
That's one way. That's one way of looking at it, right? Another possible way of looking at it is that Amit Shah, in effect, continued to give premium to electoral interests of the BJP. Precisely
what does that mean?
That precisely means, for example, that the reluctance of the center, for example, to invoke Article 355, which in effect set up as a very problematic division of labor between the Central Paramilitary Force dispatched to the states. Remember that additional 40,000 paramilitary force had been sent and till today, and they had been ineffectual in restoring a semblance of law and order, precisely because this paramilitary force continued to be in aid, quote unquote, of the state police in maintaining law and order. Remember that Biren Singh
are they in confrontation with the state police, the paramilitary forces? Are they colluding with the state police? What do you say?
Yeah, precisely that's the point. In fact, this kind of problematic division of labor between the Central Paramilitary Force and the state police open up new sides of confrontation where divided positions are taken both by the Mera Paibis as well as from the civil society based in the valley and the hill communities, precisely because the hill communities had been contending and maintaining that the paramilitary forces are more seen as guardian of peace as well as security, because their deployment is welcome in the foothills, which is considered to be providing security, semblance of security from this offensive strike. On the other side, the Métis Frontier organization, including Mera Paibis, refuse, deployment of Central Paramilitary Force on the accusation that they are openly siding with the hill communities. So in that sense, this, problematic division of labor between the Central Paramilitary Force and the state police would prolong so long as there is no formal invocation of Article 355 and President's rule, which would give direct command and control to the center to have direct supervision of law and order. I think this is critical, and unless this is addressed, you are not likely to have a semblance of law and order in the state.
No, so if Biren Singh, the Chief Minister of Manipur, if you believe that he is colluding with the Métis ethnic group because he is Métis, and if you believe that he is instigating, are you saying that he is instigating the state police to not to sort of quell the situation or not to improve the situation? Are you charging Biren Singh with doing that?
I did not charge him. In fact, there are ample evidence on the ground which suggests the complicity of Biren Singh and his government. Look at the long-term pattern of the integrationist as well as majoritarian politics that he unleashed on the hills people by labeling with certain pejorative terms like encroachers, like illegal immigrants, or poppy planters, or even narco-terrorists. And in fact, the chief minister's office unfortunately become one of the important source of peddling, all these pejorative, slanderous terms, which is very offensive as well as unacceptable, because the kind of data that emerge, for example, if you look at the way in which drug trade happened. Look at, for example, a report by the Superintendent of Narcotics and Border Affairs between 2017 and 22. Out of the 2,843 drug cases, in fact, 33% belong to the Kuki Zomi, as well as in terms of the involvement of the Métis-speaking communities, it is around 60%. So in that sense, all communities are involved in drug trade. And why is it that the state government chose to selectively brand and target a specific community for short-term political gains? That's one. Second, can I just finish? In terms of the accusation about illegal immigrants, look at, for example, that the Biren Singh government, in effect, he himself personally admitted in an open television interview in 2018 that there is no illegal immigrants in Manipur. Why is this radical turnaround, and by around 2021 and 2022, he started trumping as if most of the Kuki-Zomi groups are illegal immigrants. Look at, for example, the statistics on the ground that he himself constituted as a part of the subcommittee of the cabinet, headed by Letpa, who was the tribal minister, right? In which they found out something like 1,174 illegal immigrants, of which only 154 are detected in Churachandpur, the major spot around which this conflagration happens. So in that sense, the kind of statistics that is doled out again and again from the Chief Minister's office and from the civil society organization based in the valley areas built up a larger institutional environment, which in effect is useful to target as well as lampoon a particular community as if they are quote unquote troublemakers, and to be dealt effectively with offensive, military strikes, and which is unacceptable. It flies off the face.
Absolutely. If Biren Singh is describing the Kuki-Zomi people, the hill people, as troublemakers, that is entirely unacceptable. I would agree with you. But on the other hand, Amit Shah, the Home Minister, he has been to Manipur. He is calling for an all-party meeting. It's another matter that the Congress party is now saying that it's a little too little and too late. But how would you look at what the Home Minister himself is doing? Why do you think that the government is reluctant to impose President's rule?
I think one of the answer to this could be that, instead of upholding the constitutional provisions, which in effect is sought to be invoked in such extraordinary circumstances where there is a conspicuous breakdown of law and order. Remember that after almost 50 days of the outbreak of violence, there is no semblance of law and order. You have sporadic.
Why do you think, Professor? Why do you think that the center is refusing to invoke President's rule? Why do you think?
I think, two ways of looking at. One of the ways is that the BJP continued to put full premium on its electoral interest. Given that Biren Singh unfortunately continued to enjoy immense popularity amongst, majoritarian-minded Meitei civil society organization and society at large, this missing Biren Singh could actually transform into a sacrificial lamb. And if the Biren Singh chose, to defect to another political party or form another political formation, it would extol the end of BJP political fortune in the state. So I think this is one way. Another way is the BJP is overzealously guarding its image. This Dobur Sarkar government, which is in effect espoused to be a very effective, ruthless in maintaining law and order, cannot be sacrificed. The double engine Sarkar, because this would bust, right? The image as well as the myth built around this double Sarkar, which is considered to be very effective and ruthless in maintaining law and order. So if the BJP gives way, it would in effect be damaging to its possible, political consequences that it might entail. So in that sense, the BJP seems to put full premium on its electoral as well as political interest above upholding the constitution of India, which I think is a very grave concern.
But on the other hand, Professor, Amit Shah, the Home Minister, has sent 40,000 paramilitary forces from the center, which the Kuki-Zomi people, including yourself, believe that they are protecting these hills people. So in a sense, Amit Shah is doing all he can, isn't he?
He has been, but you see, until and unless this problematic division of labor is not resolved, the tension remains, because who takes direct control and supervision of the security, despite the fact that Kuldeep Singh has been, appointed by the central government to be the security advisor who takes care of the unified security command in the state. He continued to be ineffectual precisely because the state continues to have direct supervision of law and order. And unless Article 355 as well as President rule is formally imposed, this division of labor cannot be resolved. And this tension would remain, which essentially means that the central paramilitary force, irrespective of the number and scale of their deployment, would continue to be playing second fiddle to the state government. And in that sense, I think, given that, there are clear signals that the state government is not serious in maintaining law and order in the state, I do not think that this problematic division of labor is likely to work.
So what about Prime Minister Narendra Modi? He's in the US, of course, on a very important visit to the United States. But he hasn't said very much. Do you think that there is, what is the reaction in Manipur, both in terms of both with the Meiteis as well as the Kuki-Zomi people?
The deafening silence of the Prime Minister for 50 days now, in effect, has deeply hurt as well as angered the people. And that is precisely what explains why people move out in the roads, 3 days before in a massive numbers to break the radio sets when the Man Ki Baat was sought to be broadcasted. And very unfortunately, the Prime Minister did not take a single time to refer to the human tragedy that unravels in Manipur, although he refer to cyclone in Gujarat or other issues like Balasore trend incidents and so forth. So in that sense, looks like the Prime Minister is not interested at all in the lives lost, in the destruction of property, and in upholding the constitutional norms and values and principle upon which this structural violence is perpetuated. So in that sense, I think it deeply disappoints as well as wound the minds of the people of Manipur.
And this would be the Meiteis as well as the Kuki-Zomi tribes, or do you think it's predominantly the hill people who are disappointed?
Both sides are deeply disappointed because, this is the Prime Minister who has the time and as well as the leisure to undertake 19 rallies in Karnataka elections. Remember that in early May, after the violence breakout, Prime Minister could manage time to hold 19 election rallies in Karnataka. He immediately visit, Balasore to express solidarity as well as the sincerity of the government to relief and rehabilitation of the people affected by this train accident on That Zone. And he subsequently had the time to travel abroad extensively in Japan, in Australia, and now to US. And he does not have a time, a single word to express at least his condolence or his concern for the humanitarian tragedy that unravels in Manipur, which is deeply hurting as well as disappointing.
Professor, can I bring your attention again to the religious violence that has been taking place? Now, you said, I quoted a figure of 279 churches that were burnt down. You quoted a figure of 355. I mean, that's nearly the difference, about 70, 80 churches. But nevertheless, as many as 17 temples have been burnt down. So it's not as if the Kuki-Zomis are not also unleashing violence on the Meiteis. It's not just a one-sided ethnic sort of riot, is it?
In that sense, you see, one of the clear deliberate ploy from the very outset was that it was, planted in such a way that it gives religious color to the outbreak of violence. Look at, for example, the number of churches burned on the very first night itself on 3rd May. More than a dozen churches burned down in Imphal. And it was a deliberate ploy to send out a clear political message to New Delhi that this is a religious, violence between the Hindus and the Christians.
Who is sending this?
Precisely the Arambam Tengol as well as the Meitei Lipun who are actively, perpetuating this violence in the valley areas.
So I just want you to explain a little bit about this so-called Hindu-Christian divide in Manipur and these Meitei militant groups like the Meitei Lipun. What do they have to do with it?
The Aramboi Tengol is a kind of a militia, which was formed around 2005. And they are pointers, given that, initially there was lack of information precisely because they do not have a dedicated, website or any other organizational outlet. But things began to unravel in ways that the Arambal Tengol is a new Meitei, organization, RegTech organization, which is patronized directly by the incumbent Rajya Sabha MP, Sana Zauba Leisemba, right? And they had been given military training in terms of throwing the dart, using the horse, the mounted horse, and use sword and other instrument. But it also got revealed over time that they had been trained in guns and other arms as such. The other one, precisely with the full patronage of the state, and they have a clear networks throughout the state. The Meitei Lipun, in that sense, is also another neo-Meitei, cultural organization, purportedly organized to culturally mobilize in ways that revive, the Sanamahi religious tradition, which got lost out after, Manipur or the Meitei community got converted into Hindu, Vaishnavite Hindu religion in 1724, 1725.
So in that sense, why are you saying that this is state-sponsored? You said just that the Arambal Tengol that which is this neo-Methi militant organization or a militia. You just said that it is a state-sponsored militia.
Yeah. In that sense, you see, look at the larger institutional ecosystem within which these two organizations operate. For example, when you have this sacralization project, which got unraveled in the second stint of Biren Singh's government, remember that there was this controversial park which was inaugurated in Cebu in 2022, October 2022, the same time around which there was another attempt to sacralize Kobru Hills, which is considered to be the principal seat of Lai Ningto, the principal god of the Meitei king. And during this time, the state government actively used Meitei Lupun, for example, to carry out, religious pilgrimage by encouraging what they call Tsing Kaba, which is go to the hills in the tribal hills to sacralize, to kind of claim as well as recognize certain pockets of hills as sacred religious site. So to that extent, by using and employing the service of this Meitei Lipun, or by using Arambai Tengol in its eviction drive. Remember that this eviction drive happened around February of this year. And this eviction was also founded on a very problematic foundation precisely because appropriate institutions were not vetted. Because under Article 371C, the Hill Areas Committee, for example, is mandated to vet any scheduled matters, quote unquote, pertaining to the Hill area. So when a particular chunk of, can I just finish? When a particular chunk of land is declared to come within the purview of protected forest, the matter has to be routed through the village authority, the district council, and the Hill Areas Committee under established procedure of law. But in this case, by short-circuiting all this, Biren Singh government whip up a kind of frenzy or mass mobilization over which Arambai Tengol, the Meitei Lipun volunteers are actively accompanying the state police in ensuring that these so-called encroachers of land are evicted and their house demolished. So in that extent, if you look at the larger picture, you'll find that Meitei Lipun and Arambai Tengol had been deployed over time by the state in order to execute its integrationist as well as majoritarian project in the hill.
So, Professor, explain to me, why are the state armories being looted by rebels from both sides, or these militias from both sides, both from the Metis and the Tuki-Zomis? And I mean, I don't understand that this heavy weaponry that is being used by people to kill others. How is this happening? How are the state armories not as secure as they should be?
Yeah, I think this is precisely why I said, had it not been for the complicity of the state, all this reported looting extensively would not have been facilitated. And that is precisely why, like, I myself would maintain that they are not looted, they had been handed over. Look at the kind of asymmetrical amount of arms as well as ammunition looted. Look at, for example, the reports in as well as credible insiders would tell you that as many as 4,000 automatic rifles and 5 lakh rounds of ammunition looted in the valley areas alone. And given that there are sparse availability of police station as well as armed depot in the hill areas, this asymmetrical, looting or handing over of arms and ammunition have deeply, transformed the nature of conflict in ways which make it more lethal as well as dangerous. And look at, for example, some of the instances in which you have increasing pressure mounted on the security personnel who belong to the Meitei communities. And there are credible reports where voice records are caught, whereby Meitei officers, in effect, in their mutual conversation, talks about the undue pressure that they receive to openly side with the Meitei communities. And one of the officers, in effect, confessed in that conversation that he had to launch, mortars, rocket launcher, as well as engage in burning down specific villages without mentioning one. And they also concerned, for example, that 22 high-ranking Meitei officers who are posted in strategic locations across the states could be compromised, given that in civil war scenario, there are increasing pressure mounted on both sides to openly side with the specific communities that are more vulnerable.
No, but these are police officers. These are police officers.
These these are army officers, paramilitary army officers, whether they are in BSF, CRPF, the Regiment, Bihar Regiment, or the Spear Corps, so and so forth. Although the Spear Corps, for example, consider and rubbish this, there are possibilities that in civil war scenarios, given the amount of tremendous pressure, there are possibilities of a fallen army officer who would sully the image of the army as an institution. And given the stellar role the army played in terms of securing, peace as well as security in the hill areas, I think that it should not be allowed deployment of such large number of high-ranking military officers who are responsible in maintaining law and order or in supplementing law and order cannot be compromised at any cost. I think this is very grievous.
Professor, you are saying that 22 officers across the military forces, whether it's the army, the paramilitary, or the police, 22 officers of the Meitei ethnic community have been planted across the state. That's what you are saying. That's a serious charge.
I would not say planted. I would say that it's just, it could not be just a mere coincidence to see, right? To see that 22 of these high-ranking military officers are posted across very strategic location in the state, which points to the possibility of some of these military officers, given the kind of pressure that they are in, might in effect compromise, and a fallen officer could sully the image of the Indian army as an institution, and that has to be zealously guarded. It cannot be allowed to be hijacked to fulfill or satisfy the very narrow partisan interests of a specific communities.
With this Hindu-Christian divide that you were referring to, yeah. How do you make a statement like that? Why do you think that this is? Do you think that this is a Hindu-Christian sort of clash?
This is not the statement that I make, and the kind of inference that I seek to draw is that look at the kind of political messaging that was sent out on the very first night of the outbreak of violence, where over a dozen churches was demolished, all right? And it was a kind of a signal sent out to New Delhi to more or less fall in line with the Hindutva agenda of projecting that the Christians insurgents had been troublemaker instigating all this violence. That's one. But if you look at the counterfactuals available on the ground, for example, the number of temples that you flagged as being destroyed, I very doubt that many temples had been demolished, because it looked like in the initial days when there were a lot of false narrative as well as lies and propaganda that was spewing out from the valley areas. For example, the Bengali Association, the Marwari Association, Bihari Association in Churachandpur, from where I come from, for example, attested to the fact that not a single temple was desecrated or demolished. And except the Kobru Hills, where a kind of a makeshift tent house was built for religious pilgrimages, I have not come across any temple being deliberately destroyed by the Koki-Zaumi groups.
These are official figures. These are official figures.
Official figures have to be, really interrogated, and they have to be, matched with the evidence on the ground. And I very much doubt that many temples would have been destroyed. I do not think so.
So who is burning down the churches, and why do you think they're sending this? And who is sending this message to Delhi that this could be part of the so-called Hindutva agenda of the BJP government?
So, by all accounts, it seems that the Arambai Tengol had been actively involved in burning down, extensive number of churches in the valley areas on the first 2 days of the outbreak of violence, and subsequently all the churches that got demolished over time are in effect the function of both Arambai Tengol, Meitei Lipun, and other mobilized Rectech Meitei mobs who in fact vandalized as well as looted properties all through. So in that sense,
you are saying that these are sponsored and that these are given cover by the state police.
Definitely. So if you look at, for example, the Meitei Lipun leader Facebook post on 28th April, where he openly instigate his legions of followers, not only to cut down the trees, dry up the waters, and to purchase the MLAs who are, according to him, on sale. And he, in fact, encouraged his followers to strike them because he considered at that point of time was an opportune moment to strike when they are deeply divided. And he openly, instigated his followers to annihilate all are traditional rivals in the hills. So that is an open incitement to genocide, right? And this kind of statement coming from a public figure who have legions of followers become very alarming and got confirmed in his interview with Karan Thapar of The Wire 2 weeks ago, where he, in effect, again openly threatened that if the center does not do anything immediately, he will the blow is coming, and he says that the cookies in a 15-kilometer stretch in the Kangpokpi areas would be quote unquote wiped out. So this type of statements, in effect, would have invited immediate arrest and detention of person and prosecution in the highest offense of the land. But given the fact that this person, Pramod Singh, is allowed to remain scot-free and roam around very freely, suggests that without the complicity of the state, such type of alarmist as well as open incitement to genocide would not have been tolerated in any civilized state in the world.
But this is the open complicity of the state, which is the Biren Singh government. Do you think that the center, that the Home Minister Amit Shah, who's now called for an all-party meeting, would you also accuse him of there being complicity even on the center side?
I think the kind of signal that comes from is that given that the state, the center has deliberately refused to invoke Article 355 or impose president rule, and it's continuing to drag its feet, suggests that a kind of a complicity has seeped in, and the kind of institutionalized riot system, that obtains from the very outset, continue to transform into full circle, as it were. In fact, if you look at the division of labor that I mentioned about, is important because you see all of these so-called killings after, the initial outspat till around 7th or 8th of May happens in the foothills. And why is it that most of these offensive strike happen under full security cover led by the state police, which shows the precarity on which this division of security does not work, right? So in that sense, had it not been for the full complicity of the state as well as for the center, this precarious security arrangement would have been resolved by now. And given that, for example, in earlier instance of institutionalized riot system like Bodra, where within 3 days, the central government, in effect, effectively take over the security and the state, in effect, implemented on the ground, suggests that there is something far more deeper, insidious plan involved in ensuring that the conflict is sustained as well as perpetuated, in effect, which in the long run might not actually work out for the long-term BJP interest, given that the Meitei Lipun and Rambat Bengal.
Are you saying, Professor, that what is happening in Manipur is worse than what happened in Gujarat in 2002? You just said that.
Yeah, I think so. Precisely because given the intensity and the duration for which this is allowed to be sustained, this is allowed to be, perpetuated. I think it is far more serious in scale as well as intensity. And given that, the chief minister continues to be ineffectual and he is allowed to be at the helm of affairs, speaks volumes about the shallow commitment of the center to upholding the provisions of the rule of law in the state.
So, Professor, going forward, now that an all-party meeting has been called, how much do you think that this will be effectual? Or do you think that nothing short of the president's rule in the state will calm tempers and at least shut down these ethnic clashes?
I think convening an all-party meeting is a good idea, but I'm not really sure whether this would somehow, placate, the groups involved in the violence, precisely because political parties in India have very shallow commitment to common interests, as it were, because they want to derive partisan interests out of conflict. And this is a part of a larger problem whereby top-down policy framework does not work, right? So until and unless trust and legitimacy is restored, until and unless a semblance of law and order is in place, I think it is difficult, if not impossible, to go forward. Because look at the overtures by the Ministry of Homes in constituting the 3 members inquiry commission or the 52-member peace committee, for example. It does not work because you see, one of the misgivings of the hill areas is that given the complicity of the state government, allowing a 3-member inquiry committee to be exclusively headquartered in Imphal, not in Kangpokpi, as well as in Churachandpur, for example, might compromise the cause of natural justice itself, because until and unless central rule is imposed and a semblance of trust and legitimacy is restored in the hands of the state, I think there could be tremendous pressure mounted on by civil society organizations in the valley areas to come out with a very compromised solution of fixing accountability as well as responsibility. So in that sense, I think a serious attention need to be given to the terms and points of reference of the inquiry committees in ways that allow the Supreme Court to directly monitor, as well as rethink about the composition of the peace committee itself, because including the chief minister who is directly involved in this mayhem would seriously, implicate on the kind of the peace or the kind of order that it emphasizes for the future of Manipur.
Right, but I've asked you this before, but it's not as if the hands of the Kuki-Zomi people are clean. They've also been indulging in serious violence. They've also killed people. They've also burnt down the religious or the sacred sites of the Meiteis. So this is a two-way street, isn't it? They are guilty as well.
It has assumed the character of a low-intensity civil war. If you look at the larger literature on civil war, the kind of transformation of the nature of conflict, although I would maintain that institutional right system continue to be at the center, it has slightly slid down to a form of low-intensity civil war. Remember, for example, that the Kokomi, the valley-based organization, as well as the Meira Paibis, declared openly national war against the Kuki-Zomi, branding them as narco-terrorists.
Right.
And in fact, not the word spoken in that sense. It's right. Let me ask you, Professor. Can I come back? Can I come back to the point?
But let me ask you. It's not as if that the hands of the Kuki-Zomis are absolutely clean. They have also indulged in serious violence. They have also killed people on the other side. They have burnt down homes, churches, homes, sacred sites. So it's not as if they are completely innocent.
You see, Jyoti, I think we have to take into account the real nature of the conflicts, right? All this so-called offensive strike happened under full security cover provided by the police commando, in which, look at last week incident of offensive strike against 3 villages, Khamenlok, Aigezang, and Kopibung, in which thousands of armed militants mobilized under the full security cover of the state. And you have this defensive force, the Kuki-Zomi as it were, who would defend the villages, and if there is any intrusion and penetration into areas, whoever entered into their guarded place would get killed. That is apparent, right? It is not something that the Kuki-Zomi launch offensive strikes into Moirang, into Bisnupur, or into the Imphal areas and wreak havoc upon the Meitei population. It's the other way around. So this is something that we have to understand. And in places like Manipur, where the nature of conflict has now slid into a form of low-intensity civil war, where open national war was, openly declared against the Kuki-Zomi, you would have possibilities of collateral damage on both sides, which is inevitable, isn't it? So in that sense, it would be naive to say that the Kukis, as the victims or recipient of violence will not retaliate. If you, for example, imagine yourself that you live in a house and your house is burst into by robbers. You not keep quiet, right? You defend whatever it takes to defend the properties as well as the lives that matter to you. That is precisely what unraveled in the foothills in Manipur.
Okay, last question to you, Professor. Do you fear that this could spread? The Chief Minister of Mizoram has had a conversation, Mr. Zoram has had a conversation with the Biren Singh of Manipur, and both have talked about this. But what are your concerns? Do you think this could spread in other states of the Northeast, which is really a melting pot of hundreds of tribes and ethnic groups?
Let us remember for a fact that, Jyoti, Manipur is what we often call in our university days as Northeast Biharis. given that, they have spread all over India, because of the lack of employment opportunities, so and so forth. We have so many diasporas from Manipur who had been settled in different parts of India. And one of the consequences of which was felt early on 4th May itself, when, the Kuki as well as Meitei groups in Shillong openly clashed, and there are possibilities of this spiraling out of hand. But somehow the NPP government under Conrad Sangma had effectively dealt with this, and somehow it has been forestalled. That's one. The second possibility is, look at, for example, the kind of messaging that comes out from all Assam Meitei Students Association, which openly, threatened to impose economic blockade on Lailanpur, Kachar, and Mizoram, national highway, which in effect almost open up a new side of confrontation between, Meiteis located in Assam as well as Meiteis who are also concentrated in large number in Mizoram. So that could, this very fragile, fluid situation can, wreak havoc, and these are something that the state government, not only in different parts of Northeast India, but also in other metropolitan cities in India, have to be wary of, and they have to be zealous regarding the principles of the rule of the law. And I think so long as the guarders of or defenders of law and order or political will is not in short supply, I feel that although there are imminent threat of law and order issues in other parts of India, this can also be effectively handled.
Right. Professor, I'd like to thank you for your time and for explaining this very complicated situation, which is fast assuming or has assumed very serious and very dangerous proportions. But we will look out for Home Minister Amit Shah's all-party meeting in a couple of days from now, and we will watch the situation in Manipur. But thank you again for speaking to ThePrint.
Thank you again, Jyoti, for having me on your show.
Thank you so much.